Hi everyone, hi guys. I'm very excited to get this started. I wanted to thank you for being here and for taking part of this course. It's gonna be a lot of fun. We're gonna learn a lot of things, and usually I'll be talking here. The course will have plenty of videos. Some of them will be here. Most of them though will be back there in the computer, right? We will have like a screen captures videos of tutorial type of videos of how to do things, and some of them will be right there behind the camera, whiteboard, where I'll be maybe expanding on some explanations. Okay, so in this video I wanted to quickly have a brief just show what the modules are, the syllabus. And so I'll be looking around the whiteboards behind. So if I'm looking here and there, is because I've got some notes in the whiteboard. Cool. Okay, so we will have 6 modules and some bonuses. Okay, the modules will be module 1, Orchestration. We'll see the difference between real orchestra and when we work with samples. Some basics there, so you can go quickly over that, especially if you've got some experience with mockups. Module 2 will be templates. That'll be a long one. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Arranging will be a key module. Have to pay a lot of attention in that one, but that one will be really cool with lots of techniques. And then the main ones, mixing. It will come in module 4 and 5, and it'll take 2 modules. Module 4 will be mixing, and module 5 will be mixing. We'll talk about some specifics about mixing and mastering. Okay, and finally we will have module 6, composing workflow. We will make sure that all the techniques we've learned, we keep our mockups quality is consistent. We will have a workflow, so it goes well all the time. Okay, cool. So expanding on the first one, Orchestration. We'll see some of the basics and then a bit more advanced, but we will see, definitely we will talk about the difference, why orchestrating is different than orchestrating. Why do we use different techniques when it comes to orchestration? For those who have a deep knowledge in orchestration, it can be a bit confusing at the beginning. Why aren't we using the same technique, the same arranging technique that we know for orchestrating? Why don't we use it for when we are using samples here? Well, there are several differences. We will define them, and then we'll talk about balance spanning and how to set different layers so we get clarity. Some of those basic, and the first video that we will have in this module will be really basic, recording dynamics, but it'll be real quick. And finally we will talk about 2 important concepts: key switches and EQ. Okay, those are very important for the next module, templates. Okay, because when it comes to templates, in that module 2, we will discuss about first we will talk about routing, which is very important, because when it comes to small templates, not that big of a deal, but when it comes to bigger templates, even medium-sized templates, we need to know about the proper routing so we can optimize the CPU resources afterwards, and we are not using more instances that we really need. Okay, so we will get down to routing real quick, and with what we've learned about key switches and EQ in module 1, we will apply that to really build optimized and efficient templates. Okay, so then we will talk about small and big templates, and we will have a full video about what would be the smallest but still efficient and the template that allows me to work fast, okay, and still keep the quality. Okay, so, and then we will talk about modular templates, and there we will see modular templates. That concept we will see in several sequencers. We'll see Sonar and Cubase. Okay, but the techniques, the ideas will apply to any sequencer. Okay. Finally, we will talk about organization, and we will talk about groups, how to group things. So then we've got control over those, maybe 200, 300 or more tracks. And we'll talk about groups, we will talk about context instances, we will talk about buses, and we'll talk about stems, okay, how to set that up so we can export it the right way, and it's fast and efficient. Okay, I'm looking down here, just recording. I shot a video right before, and the audio didn't get recorded, so just checking. Cool. Okay, and finally, the last part in this module will be reverbs. Okay, because we will talk about reverbs not as much as for mixing, but setting up depth. Okay, making sure that we are using the reverb the right way, so our mockup uses the 3 dimensions. Okay, left, right, up, high, low, and then depth. Okay, up front or farther away. In that module, we will have a little chat about computer specs. Okay, because that is something that it's not orchestration, it's not music, but at some point we have to talk about it, because it will limit or not us being able to do what our creativity tells us to. Okay, so module 1, module 2, module 3 will be about arranging, and that one may not be that long as the second one, but that one is key, as we've said, and we will see a list of techniques that will make our music sound like the real orchestra, and some of them won't make that much sense, and they don't have anything to do with what we would do with a real orchestra. So with a real orchestra, we would orchestrate it one way, the way we've learned it, we learned in the past. Here it won't apply the same thing. Okay, so it'll be a list of techniques for those who are not that into orchestration, like real orchestration. You'll learn those techniques, and it'll be cool. For those who are more into real orchestration, it may be a bit confusing just at the beginning. Okay, but it'll make sense. Cool. And then we get to the main ones. We get to module 4 and module 5: mixing 1, mixing 2, and mastering. Okay, so in the first one, we will talk about the generic things, and we will talk about we will talk about exporting stems. Okay, when we will get down to mixing, I'm sure you're familiar with that, but just in case, sometimes it doesn't make that much sense having using all the tracks for mixing, and it makes it easier to export groups of tracks and mixing with the stems. Okay, we will talk about how to separate those stems, how to choose what stems to use, and then we will talk about some general things about mixing. We will talk about analog saturation, reverb, EQ, compression, and finally we will talk about automation, which is where the magic happens. Okay, and we will have one extra video that it's a bit technical. We'll talk about sample rate and bit depth. That, depending on the plugins you are using, it doesn't make that big of a difference, but sometimes it makes a difference when mixing, not when composing, and we will talk about that. Okay, second part of mixing will come in module 5. Checking audio, great. Module 5, if in module 4, mixing 1, we talked about the generic things. In module 5, we will get down to specific things, and we will talk about mixing for strings, mixing for brassing and woodwinds, mixing percussion. Okay, and then we will have a part where we'll have a lot of fun. Okay, it's called learning from the masters, and basically we will take a close look to the stems of Pirates of the Caribbean, 2 tracks of Pirates of the Caribbean, and those stems are the mixed finished stems sent to the dub session. Okay, the dubbing session, for them to get mixed with dialogue and effects. Okay, so that's a finished, produced stems right to the dub session. We will see how they sound, and we will be able to hear the staccato strings and the strings and the synths, the sub bass, the percussion, brass and woods, etc. We'll take a close look to it, and then we will suggest in that video that when we are setting up our template, to have instruments that, if you want to reach that sound, that they sound similar. And since we've got them separated in the stems, we can try to mimic that sound. Okay. Then we've got that'll be the next video. Will be a very in-depth, a very long video about one concept which will allow us, now that we've learned all the mixing techniques, will allow us to sort of have mixing template, okay, where we will just import the audio stems, and then we will have a set of tools that will keep our mixing consistent now that we've learned all the techniques, okay. And that video will be called Expanding Mixing Depth, okay, and we will talk about setting up that template that will give us the tools for then afterwards mixing. Final video in this module 5 will be mastering, okay. We'll take a close look at mastering. Finally, we've got composing workflows. That's module number 6, and basically it's all we've learned. We will put it together so again we can, 1, work fast, 2, keep it consistent quality, okay. It'll be a bit of a long module because we will have a 1-hour video or maybe 4 15 minutes videos where we will try to get maybe it's under an hour, we'll see. We'll have a 1 minute to compose under an hour, so composed, mixed and master, we'll try to have that under an hour. Okay, so that's it. Then we've got the bonuses depending on the course that you've chosen. Again, thank you very much for being here. I'm so excited to get this started, and talk to you soon. Hi, my name is Mark Giovanni, and I will be your online instructor for this course. First, I wanted to say welcome and congratulations for being part of it. In this lesson, we will find a series of videos where we'll be covering the basics of what we will learn in future modules. I will ask not to skip any video, even though they may seem familiar at the beginning. You may find some information very valuable for you. There will be 5 to 6 minute videos at least, but generally they'll go longer, like around 10 minutes. At the end, you will find the assignment. It'll be a bit challenging. I'll be asking you to compose a 1 to 2 minutes piece using all the concepts that we learned. If you're very busy, you can go with a shorter version, a minute or less, but I would encourage you to go with the 2 minutes if you like challenges. Post the cue in our Facebook group that we set up so we all can listen to the piece, and I'll be giving feedback to your piece there as well. Use the Facebook group as well for commenting on materials on the course or asking any question related to what we've learned. If you'd prefer not posting the piece in the Facebook group, you can also send us the piece to the email information that you will find at the end of this module. Once more, welcome to the course, and let's get this started. What's the difference between samples and the real orchestra? Well, there are many differences, but the 3 main differences are: 1, dynamics. That's a major one. Second, number 2, a real instrument, like a musician, every note they can play it in, they can give every note so many variations, okay, and the shades. They can do so many different things. Whereas with samples, we will have staccatos, spiccatos, portato, and we will have like maybe 8 different things. And it'll be a lot of work for us, really, to use all those different articulations. And it's said that the more articulations that you use, the more realistic the mock-up sounds, right? Well, it's a lot of work, and so that's another difference. And finally, there's one thing that's not that obvious. It has to do with frequencies. Okay, we'll talk about this one in a minute. But so when we are using samples, what do we have to do so they sound like the real thing? Okay, so first we've said that dynamics is it's a major thing, right? Well, the orchestra, not the orchestra. Let's talk about violin section, for example. When they are playing, they are singing, and when they're performing that phrase, that melody, and when they've got this long note, it'll start a bit higher in sound, right? And then it'll have sort of a decay, and then it'll go a bit static but still decaying, and then it'll go up a little bit before the next note, right? That's what's going to happen in maybe 2 seconds, and you've got 16 people there doing that. Whereas when we've got those like sustained notes samples, we will press one note, and that's, we'll get that static sound, okay? No movement, no dynamic. There are some libraries though that include a little bit of variation there for the long notes, especially with the legatos. Cine Samples does that a little bit, the ADO Adagio does that. That is like the main thing when they created the Adagio, about not recording static notes, but rather giving an envelope, a sort of a curve to every note. Okay, that makes things more musical, but we are losing control. Okay, so it's always there's a line there. Okay, so what do we have to do for our samples to sound like a real orchestra when it comes to dynamics? Well, we have to use modulation and expression for to give some dynamics. Okay, so modulation, it's cross-fading between dynamic layers. Expression, it's pure volume basically, but it'll enhance the modulation effect. Okay, now about all the variations, all the different shades that a musician will give every note. Well, that's why we've got the different articulations. Okay, we have to use what I call performance type of patches. Okay, so if we need to record a crescendo, if we in our library have a crescendo, let's use that crescendo. Okay, why? Because that crescendo is being recorded in a way, so the musician's been trained, and they've played their instruments for years and years, and they know how to perform right, so that crescendo starts softer and then it ends more aggressive. Whereas if we go with a modulation and expression, yeah, it'll sound okay, but basically what we get is a computer, an algorithm crossfading between different dynamic layers. Is that going to sound realistic? Yeah, sort of, kinda. Won't never sound as realistic as a real thing. Okay, so if we can use forte piano or as sforzato or all those patches, all those performance type of patches, let's go ahead and use those, because that'll give our mockups a more human, a more realistic interpretation and performance of the music. Okay, and then there's a third thing, frequencies. Right, okay, so that's a bit technical, okay? It's very simple to understand though. Okay, let's think about an orchestra, okay? An orchestra, you've got 64 musicians there. They are playing, they're performing, and it's like a one massive instrument, right? Playing in a big room, okay? So there are several things that are happening there, okay? There's a lot of sound, a lot of music, lots of harmonics, and a lot of frequencies. They generate the sound. The sound will hit the walls, right? And will come back, and it'll create that room sound. So the room will shape the sound of the orchestra. Also, the musicians will absorb some of the frequencies, all the clothes, etc. That will absorb some of the high frequencies. Okay, the more musicians, the more absorption. Okay, so it's a lot of acoustic stuff going on there. Okay, now let's go back here. Do we record all the music at the same time, or do we actually record the flute and then the oboe, and then the strings, violin 1, 2, viola? That's the way we do it, right? Well, what's happening there? What is happening is The mic setup, the miking technique that they use for capturing the violins 1 is the same mic technique that they use for capturing the whole orchestra. Okay? So they've got the same amount of mics there within the same room. Okay, so we will play the violins, and we will get those violin sound plus all the reflections, right? All the acoustics that we talked about, plus all the mics noise that we can't hear. But then when we also record the violins too, and the violas, right? And the cellos, and the double basses, all that mic noise that we don't hear, it is there. And it starts stacking. All the reflections on the response of that room, it'll stack as well. Okay? And also, when they record the violins, there's just 16, 12, 14 people. There's not that much people absorbing sound. Okay? So when we record one track after another, what we are doing is we are stacking the sound, and what will happen is that some frequencies will stack and it will generate some problems. Okay? Generally, we will have some trouble in the mid-low end. Okay? That is why we will talk afterwards. We will have to apply a certain EQ cut to avoid some frequencies to stack. Okay? We will also need to cut the low end of most of the tracks, and especially a little bit more than just low for the higher, for the instruments that sound a bit higher in register, so we don't get all the noise. Most of the professional sounding libraries, they don't cut the low end noise just because it sounds, they preserve the pure sound of the recording, especially Spitfire, and Cine Samples does that as well. There are other libraries that will cut, but most of the professional sounding libraries won't. And what it'll happen is that for us it'll create some problems. We'll see how to solve those. Okay, so recap. Difference between samples and orchestra. Dynamics. We have to work hard to give it dynamics. Expression and modulation, at least. Different shades, variation. We have to use performance type of patches so we get the real performance. Okay? And frequencies. One orchestra playing at the same time, it's very different than several tracks recorded separately. Okay? We will have to apply specific EQs for avoiding those frequencies stacking. This lesson is not about how to record dynamics, but rather how to record realistic sounding dynamics. Dynamics. This is one of the first lessons. It's a very simple concept. I'm sure most of you know about it, but it makes a big difference. The concept in this lesson is not about learning how to record dynamics, but rather it's how to make sure that it sounds really good, okay, so it sounds realistic. There are two rules when it comes to recording dynamics. The first one would be we are using more than one MIDI message at the same time when we are recording dynamics. Okay. Second rule is we will use a controller. Sure, we can use the mouse for drawing dynamics, but using a controller will make it feel much more natural, okay, much more musical. The best approach is recording dynamics while we are inputting notes, okay, so while we are playing, we are recording dynamics. That is not a must. If you are having a hard time with a piano, with the keyboard, then you could first record the melody and then just hit play again and record dynamics on top of the melody. Okay, they would merge in the same MIDI region. So use 2 or more MIDI control changes for dynamics. Let's see some examples. In this controller, I assigned expression, so control change number 11 to this fader, modulation to this one, control change number 1, and control change 2 for breath control for this third fader here. There are some libraries that will use breath control, so control change number 1, for controlling vibrato, especially with the strings patches, okay? So usually we are told that we have to use modulation to crossfade between the different dynamic layers, and that's true, but it makes a bigger difference and makes it sound more realistic when it comes to dynamics, using modulation and expression. Let's try using modulation with just one sustained note, and then we'll use modulation and expression at the same time. Now with expression. Now, if we include vibrato control by using this third fader here, then we can give that note some extra realism. Let's see how vibrato changes the sound of one note. So let's start this note at mezzo forte. We won't move any of the dynamics or expression here, and we'll change vibrato amount. So no vibrato, lots of vibrato, okay? Okay, let's use the three of them at the same time. Let's start from niente. Major difference. Let's just remind once how it sounded just using modulation. And now the three of them. Okay, major difference. Now let's play a phrase and let's see how realistic this can sound. This is the phrase that we recorded, so you can see vibrato will come in later. We started with expression to sort of start from niente, and then we brought some modulation in to start crossfading from the pianissimo layers to the more piano, mezzo forte. They sort of do the same curves, but as you can see, they are not exactly the same. Or they won't start, building or going for louder dynamics at the same time. You can see how modulation started earlier here to sort of change the timbre, and then expression picked up to sort of reinforce that increase in volume, and finally vibrato went up. Dynamics will apply obviously to other families. There will be some libraries where you'll be able to control vibrato, and some others you won't be able to. As a final note, we can also apply dynamics to other patches that aren't like long notes type of patches. We may think, okay, we will use dynamics for sustained notes or legatos, but then when we've got a patch slowly like string runs, we can apply dynamics there too, because even though they may sound good, enhancing them a little bit with dynamics will be going one step farther. Let's hear, for example, this patch here. Applying some dynamics will make it sound so much more realistic. Okay? Or we could go like, which would sound much more natural than this. So as a recap, when it comes to dynamics, we've got two rules. First, using more than one control change at the same time. Ideally, at least two of them, modulation and expression. Ideally, if your library comes with vibrato control, then it'd be a good idea to use three of them at the same time. If you don't feel confident at using the keyboard and the MIDI controller at the same time, you could record the melody or the chords with the keyboard and then doing a second passing the sequencer with the controller and then merge both. But use a controller. You can use the mouse and draw expression and modulation, but it's a better idea using a controller. It'll make it feel much more realistic. Balance is one of the most important concepts when it comes to creating professional sounding orchestral mockups. Okay? The balance is what is going to make our mockup to sound realistic or not. And it is the very first thing that will make your mockup to sound fake. So if it's not balanced, if it's not if every instrument is not in the right volume level, it's gonna sound fake. It's not gonna sound realistic, okay? And that is a skill that it takes time to learn, and it is about, it's learning from the others, listening and comparing, and we get better at it with time, okay? But it's very common, for example, having the woodwind sounding a bit louder than they should. Generally, in an orchestra, if we've got every instrument playing forte, like woods, brass, and strings playing forte, generally we will hear brass, we will hear strings, and behind those we will hear woodwinds, right? And when we are creating that mock-up and we start, recording the strings and then maybe the brass and finally the woodwinds, it's sort of when we are arranging, when we are creating the mock-up in our sequencer, it's like we need to hear the woodwinds, right? But the truth is, unless the woodwind is playing a solo and the orchestra is orchestrated in a way so the woodwind can sing, if it's not that case, usually the woodwinds won't stand out that much. Really, they will rather blend within the orchestra. Okay, so it's very common to hear, when someone starts creating their first mock-ups, to have the woodwinds too hot. So balance is very important. Another example of out of balance is having the brass playing fortissimo, playing forte or fortissimo, and still having it softer in the mix. Okay, generally what we get out of that is a brass that sounds weak. It sounds more like, it sounds treble, but it doesn't have the body that it should. Okay, that's because we are pushing the modulation up, so we've got that brassy sound, but then it sounds like too much, too loud, and then we bring the volume down and all of a sudden it sounds fake. Maybe we need some orchestration, maybe it needs some percussion for supporting the brass, maybe the brass is not well orchestrated, maybe we've got the trumpets and trombones, but we also need the horns and the tuba down there, maybe we need some chimbazos, maybe we need some bass trombone, and that's why maybe it's to us it's sounding like this is not the brass sound that I want, so I'll bring it down, even though I'm pushing the modulation up, so I get this brassy sound. Okay, so super important. Balance is the one thing that is going to make a bigger difference in our mock-up, and that's what is going to make our mock-up sound realistic or not. Balance is one of the most important concepts when it comes to creating professional sounding orchestral mockups. Okay? The balance is what is going to make our mockup to sound realistic or not. And it is the very first thing that will make your mockup to sound fake. So if it's not balanced, if it's not if every instrument is not in the right volume level, it's gonna sound fake. It's not gonna sound realistic, okay? And that is a skill that it takes time to learn, and it is about, it's learning from the others, listening and comparing, and we get better at it with time, okay? But it's very common, for example, having the woodwind sounding a bit louder than they should. Generally, in an orchestra, if we've got every instrument playing forte, like woods, brass, and strings playing forte, generally we will hear brass, we will hear strings, and behind those we will hear woodwinds, right? And when we are creating that mock-up and we start, recording the strings and then maybe the brass and finally the woodwinds, it's sort of when we are arranging, when we are creating the mock-up in our sequencer, it's like we need to hear the woodwinds, right? But the truth is, unless the woodwind is playing a solo and the orchestra is orchestrated in a way so the woodwind can sing, if it's not that case, usually the woodwinds won't stand out that much. Really, they will rather blend within the orchestra. Okay, so it's very common to hear, when someone starts creating their first mock-ups, to have the woodwinds too hot. So balance is very important. Another example of out of balance is having the brass playing fortissimo, playing forte or fortissimo, and still having it softer in the mix. Okay, generally what we get out of that is a brass that sounds weak. It sounds more like, it sounds treble, but it doesn't have the body that it should. Okay, that's because we are pushing the modulation up, so we've got that brassy sound, but then it sounds like too much, too loud, and then we bring the volume down and all of a sudden it sounds fake. Maybe we need some orchestration, maybe it needs some percussion for supporting the brass, maybe the brass is not well orchestrated, maybe we've got the trumpets and trombones, but we also need the horns and the tuba down there, maybe we need some chimbazos, maybe we need some bass trombone, and that's why maybe to us it's sounding like this is not the brass sound that I want, so I'll bring it down, even though I'm pushing the modulation up, so I get this brassy sound. Okay, so super important. Balance is the one thing that is going to make a bigger difference in our mock-up, and that's what is going to make our mock-up sound realistic or not. So there's this thing about balance all the time. Usually it's hard to when we've got different libraries, every one of them will sound different, because there are some libraries that will sound louder, some libraries will sound softer. Cinesamples, for example, sounds generally louder, at least the strings sound louder. Albion, it's sort of in the soft side, so we have to balance that. So I'll try to give like an overview of the orchestral instruments. Okay, so we will take the strings as the main family in the orchestra, and then we will say there are some instruments that will sound louder, some instruments that will sound softer, but we'll have the strings as the main thing, because everything's gonna be relative to the strings. Okay, so let's talk about the woodwinds. The woodwinds generally will sound a bit softer than the strings, unless we divide the strings. But let's keep it simple. We've got the strings, the woodwinds will sound softer than the strings, the brass will sound louder than the strings. That's general simple rule. Okay, now does that mean that we won't hear the woodwinds? No, we will still hear the woodwinds, but they tend to blend with the strings better rather than standing out. The brass won't blend within the strings. Generally the brass will stand out. Okay, so woodwinds will sound softer, brass will sound louder. Now when we are balancing, that can work as a general rule, but then it will depend, right? If we've got violins playing in octaves, and then we've got flutes playing in octaves with the violins, will we still hear the flutes? Well, it depends. Generally we won't hear the flutes, but it depends on the octave, because the violins will sound always loud. They can play loud both in its low register for the violins that low G, mid register in the staff or above the staff in the high register, they will always be able to play soft or forte. For the flute, for example, it's going to be harder. If they are playing in the low register, they won't have the projection power that they would have the flutes in a higher register. So if we've got the violins playing in a higher register and we've got the flutes playing with them, it's easier for us to hear the flutes than if they would be playing the low register and doubling with the flutes. We wouldn't hear the flutes. If that would be the case, it would be a better idea doubling them with clarinets, which will still have the projection power and create that thicker sound in that mid range for the clarinet. The clarinet can go much lower than the flute and even lower than the violin's register. Okay, so if we want for the flute to stand out, then we would have to have the flutes playing up an octave with the strings. And then even though the woodwinds generally will sound softer than the strings in volume, if we have them playing up an octave, so one octave above the higher violin, then they would sound louder. So the woodwinds sound softer than the strings. So let's have, for example, if we had violins and we had flutes, they would sort of blend. But if we have the flutes playing up an octave, then they will sound louder and we will be able to hear the flutes. Okay? With the trumpets, like with the brass, that doesn't happen. When we've got brass and the strings in the same register, we will have more brass sound, will predominate, will sound louder. So if we've got violins playing in above the staff, right? So we are talking about that G, that high G above the staff, and we've got trumpets playing that same note, the trumpets will definitely sound louder. So no matter if you've got one solo trumpet or a trio of trumpets playing, they will always sound louder. Now again, the lower we go in register with the trumpets, the less projection power they've got, while the strings will keep that projection power in the lower register. Okay, so trombones. The trombones, they have a lot of projection power. They will sound loud all the time. And they can go low in register and they still have that power. Within the strings, let's talk a little bit. So those would be the basic concepts. Okay, when we've got the full orchestra playing at the same time, usually we will have a hard time, even though we've managed well to cut some frequencies and everything sounds clear, we don't have any muddiness problem. Still, generally the mid-low part of your arrangement, it's gonna be hard to have clarity there. So the cellos, if they are playing, if they are featured, if they are playing and no one else has any material there, we will be able to hear the cellos. But generally, when we've got those cello staccatos, but we also have maybe some background trombones playing long notes and some bassoons, it's gonna be hard to hear the cellos. The cellos is an instrument that the cello section, it's a section that can sound real thick. It can sound loud. Now, when we've got more instruments covering that area, the cellos they don't get lost, because if we get rid of them, it's like something's missing. But when we've got more stuff going on in that area, it's like that wall of sound, and the cellos usually will lose definition. If we want the cellos to stand out, it's good to bring in some and double them with bassoons. So the bassoons doing the same thing that the cellos are doing, so they stand out. Okay, sometimes you can double the cello figure with some sort of percussion, some toms or some snares or something that helps giving definition to the cellos. The cellos will stand out when we've got the orchestra playing at the same time. The cellos will stand out when they go higher in their register. So the cello is a good instrument. It's got a lot of power, it can create a thick sound, but when you've got all the orchestra playing at the same time, they tend to get lost. So don't try in your mock-up to make sure to hear the cellos. Don't try that, otherwise it will sound unbalanced. The cello is there, and if it's arranged that way, we will be able to hear them, but generally it's an instrument that is there. If we get rid of it, we will feel that something's missing, but generally it's not like something that stands out. It's an instrument that sings beautifully when it goes higher in register and we can hear it, but it does a better job sort of doubling the bass, giving definition to the bass part. So it's in the low part, right? It's something in between. Like for the basses, what happens with the bass is it's sort of the same thing. They don't have clarity. We don't clearly hear the bass line. But totally, if we get rid of the bass, the double basses, something's missing there. All of a sudden we lose all that low end. Okay, so with the cellos, it happens the same thing. It may be a little bit more subtle, but it happens the same thing. Okay. The violas, it's even more subtle. It's an instrument that is there, it's super important, but generally if we are orchestrating and arranging or mock-up, we are doing the syncastration and we expect to hear the violas and we bring them up in volume, it's gonna eat all the space, and we don't want that. If we add violas, and we've got the violins, 1, 2 violas, cellos and double basses, the violas, they have to be in the background. Okay, otherwise it's gonna sound fake, and we will start having problems like the violas eating all the space, and we don't want that, because what we really want to do is we want to hear the high violins, the high strings where they come in, all the violins. We want to have definition in that mid area where we may have some oboes and the English horns. We want to have the horns as well, and the clarinets. All that area, we want to make sure that we can hear that mid-range area. Okay, so for the woodwinds, going back to the woodwinds, flutes, we will hear them when they go up an octave. The oboe, when they go in the higher register, the oboes, it's an instrument that's so easy to hear. It's got a really thin sound that usually will cut through the mix. The piccolos, usually it's easy to hear as well because they will play higher in the register. If we bring it down, we will lose it, because as happens the same with the flute, it'll lose that projection power. Again, with the oboes, it's easy to hear them, especially when they go up in register. Oboes playing in the low register, they create that darker sound, still have projection power, but not that much. For the clarinet, it's a blender type of instrument. It's usually we won't hear the clarinet that much, but it'll help putting sections together. Okay, but it's an instrument that, again, it's there, you don't hear it that much, but if you get rid of it, something's missing. Okay, the bass clarinet is gonna add support to the cellos and the double basses. It works great with bassoons, but still it's an instrument that, because of the sound characteristics, it's gonna blend rather than stand out. The bassoons, though, it's an instrument that you can clearly hear in the orchestra, but careful not to bring it up too much. Usually it's an instrument that with samples usually tends to sound very good, so don't get carried away by how good they sound and bringing them up in volume. You want to keep it in the right place. When you put them with the cellos, you try to find that balance in between. You can hear both the bassoons and the cellos. It's an instrument that's got a lot of power and there's a section as well, so they'll be able to stand out in that mid-low register, but don't bring them up too much. Okay, so that's for the woodwinds. For the brass, the trumpets will always stand out unless you bring them down in register. They'll have a hard time. The trombones, they'll be able to stand out in every register. The horns is an instrument that does not sound as loud as the trumpets or the trombones. Still, usually it's a bigger section, so they have projection power, but they work really well if you have soft horns. They will blend real well with the rest of the instruments. Be careful not to bring it up too much when they are playing soft, because when they play soft, they tend to blend with the rest of the instruments. But when you are playing like more triumphant and epic horn melodies in its mid-high register, they will stand out. Okay, it blends real well with cello, so you can have cellos and horns playing the melody, cellos in the high register. It'll add some, some emotion and lyricism to the melody, while having the horns that add that epicness and cinematic feel to it. So it's really common to have them both. The horns would predominate, but the cellos would bring, some timbre to the melody. So that's a cool thing. The tuba, as the last brass instrument, would sort of blend. It's like the tuba is like the volume knob to the brass section. They always say the double bass is like the volume knob to the orchestra, right? When you don't have them, the orchestra sounds good, but when you bring them in, it's not like all of a sudden you can hear them, but it's like bringing it up the orchestra volume, because it's like all this low end coming in. So the tuba is sort of the same thing. It's an instrument that won't stand out, but when you bring it in, it's like the volume knob. All of a sudden, it's that low end that the brass needed. So it won't stand out, but it'll bring that low end information that we need. Okay, so we define the woods, we define the woods, and so the brass and also the strings. Okay, the violins will stand out, the violas will blend, the cellos are powerful, but usually it's hard to hear them, so be careful with those. Even though when they go high in register, you can hear them, they can play beautiful melodies. And the double basses would work as the volume knob for the whole orchestra. They won't stand out, they won't have definition, but they will bring that low end information that's so important for getting that full cinematic sound that sometimes we wanna achieve. Okay, so with that, try to balance your template, but don't expect to have everything perfect. It'll change in every cue, and you may need to rebalance things as you are composing. Okay, when it comes to panning, we've got to have two concepts in mind. Okay, we've got like two rules. First rule. Well, first of all, what's panning? Panning is, moving things left to right. And why do we need to pan things? Well, we've got several spaces. When it comes to music, or when it comes to sound, we've got 3 different spaces that we can use. We can use the right to left. Okay, we can use depth. Okay, front, back, and then we can use low to high, range. Okay, when it comes to range, it's when we talk about arranging, right, and orchestration. When it comes to depth, usually we're talking about reverbs and setting up the instrument in a room, different, closer or farther away. When it comes to left to right, we are talking about panning. Okay, so why do we pan? Well, we pan because we've got that, that space available, and we need to utilize it. We need to use that space. Otherwise, if we put everything in the center, then it'll sound centered, and we don't want that. Well, if we want something to sound centered, it is okay to have it centered. But if we are having everyone in the same place, we won't be able to hear everything. Okay, so we want to create separation and put everything in its place, so it's easier afterwards to understand musically what we are saying. Okay, so so two concepts. 2 rules. Okay, when it comes to panning, it has to be balanced. Okay, left and right, they have to be balanced. Okay, so if the right side sounds heavier, right, because we've got all the brass and some percussion there, and also the cellos, and here we just have like the high strings and maybe a flute, it'll sound too heavy here. So first rule, it has to sound balanced. So we've got to figure out a way for it to sound balanced. Okay, and the second rule is that generally the low frequencies, we want them in the center. That applies in music, but does not apply that much when it comes to orchestral music. Okay, when it comes to orchestral music, we want to leave things the way they naturally are. Okay, so if the double basses and the cellos are here, they should be there. Okay, so that being said, do we really have to pan when we are talking about orchestral music? The question usually is, okay, cool, but my sample library, when I load the cellos, they already sound right. And when I load the violins, they already sound left. And so, do I really have to pan? Okay, yes, most of the professional libraries will come pre-pan. That is a good starting point, but moving things around a little bit more, so panning the violins a little bit more to the left and the cellos a little bit more to the right, will make our mix to sound a bit wider, and it will open the mix, it will make our music to sound wider, and we will gain clarity. Okay, so it is very important. Now, that doesn't mean that we'll load the cellos and we move it like 100% left, right, sorry. No, it's just, a tiny tweak, just a tiny bit more to the right or a tiny bit more to the left, okay? Just for the sake of opening the mix a little bit more, okay? And a quick tip here, I usually pan in contact or play, okay? Because we will talk about that. I like saving contact instances so I can, like all the patches loaded there. So then I can, in a future project, maybe I can I can load that contact instance and all the panning is there, okay? So panning is very important. We have to use all the space that we've got available. Two rules: balance left and right, and generally low frequencies in the center. Though with orchestral music, we have to leave the things way that they are. Most of the sample libraries will come pre-panned, but that is a good starting point. But we still have to open the things a little bit more. That will make our music sound wider, and we will gain clarity. Layers and distributing our musical ideas. 80% of our final sound, of our mock-up final sound, comes down to arranging, okay? How we distribute our musical ideas. That's super important. There's not much that we can do when it comes to mixing. Actually, if we make any mistake, right? If we make any mistake during the arranging process, we won't fix those arranging mistakes afterwards. We won't fix them in the mixing. We won't fix them in the mastering. Okay? Arranging is distributing ideas, and it is hard. It is hard, really, because as a musicians, generally we want to make things as complex as possible. But the thing is, we have to think about what's the purpose. Okay, so this section, I have to have a really clear idea of what do I want, what's the purpose of this idea, right? And it'll depend. Okay, if it's film music, we will have reasons why we are arranging that the specific way. Okay. If we want to create tension, then we will have specific musical ideas and then specific layers, and we will organize them in a way, and some layers will have more weight than others. Okay, but we have to have a clear idea of which layers and what musical ideas do I need, and every musical idea, it's got to have a purpose. So think about arranging like the most important thing that will define the final sound of your mock-up, okay? And also think about this. Back in the days, or when you go to a concert hall, there's the orchestra playing there. They don't go over any EQ plugin. They don't go over any mixing. The orchestra and every instrument in the orchestra has evolved in a way so when they play together, it sounds that way. Okay? So it's our work, it's our duty to arrange things in a way that will work and it'll sound orchestral, it'll sound good. Okay, that's what we have to do. Then we've got other techniques. We've got mixing techniques to go beyond the orchestral sound to make it sound even better. Okay, but these days we've got the tools. We've got the sample libraries that sound outstanding. It's a matter of arrangement. It's a matter of orchestration. It's a matter of composing. That's what's gonna make our music sound good. No matter if it's orchestral or hybrid or electronic music, it's the arrangement has to be right, and you have to distribute the musical ideas, and every musical idea has to have a purpose. Okay, and finally, a quick tip. That's a classic on orchestration, but when it comes to distributing ideas, there are many things that will help creating separation between those ideas. But the main three things that will help the most creating separation between the different layers, different musical ideas, are timbre, articulation, and range. Okay? Very simple. Timbre. If we've got an oboe playing here and we've got violas, it'll be very easy to hear the oboe over the violas because they've got different timbre. Okay? Articulation. If we've got strings playing long notes and then we've got a piano, very easy to separate those ideas. For the listener, it'll be very easy. Why? Because the or let's say, okay, let's keep strings. We've got the lower string playing long notes and the higher string playing staccatos. Very easy, okay? The different articulations, easy to understand, to hear, to separate different ideas. And finally, range. If we've got lower strings, okay, in the lower register, and then playing long notes, whatever. And then we've got the higher strings playing long notes, but in a higher register, very easy to understand, to hear, to separate the different ideas for the listener. Okay, if we use those three elements, timbre, articulation, and range, and we've got an oboe playing staccatos in the higher register, and then we've got lower strings playing long notes, super simple for the listener to understand. Okay, we've got two very separate and different ideas. So recap. Layers, distributing our musical ideas or arranging, that's the most important thing when it comes to defining our mock-up final sound. I would say that's the 80%, then mixing is to be 50% and mastering will be the final 5%. Mixing and mastering won't fix any arranging mistake. Arranging is about distributing ideas. Every idea has to have a purpose. The orchestral sound and every instrument within the orchestra has evolved in a way so when we put them all together and it's well orchestrated, it'll sound orchestral, and it's the orchestral sound that we are used to. And finally, 3 tips for creating separation between layers: timbre, articulation, range. Okay, so volumes. There are many different types of volumes within a sequencer. Okay, we've got different types of MIDI control changes for controlling volume, and we've got also the volume fader in our mixer in every track. We've got the gain in that track. Okay, so when it comes to one track, when it comes to one patch, when it comes to one instrument, there are many different ways for us to control volume. So let's see which one would work best and what would be the use that we'd have to give to every one of them. Okay, so let's open Contact here. Oh, there's another volume, by the way, within your sampler Contact or Play. You'll have a volume for every patch that you load, and then you will have a master volume generally, and you also will have a volume with the output in every for every output within that sampler. So there are many places where you can control the volume of your patches. So let's simplify this, and let's say that we could control volume from MIDI control change number 7, MIDI control change number 11, then within Contact, okay, for every patch would have its volume. We could use, in the mixer, we could use the fader volume, and also we could use the gain volume. Okay, here, gain. Okay, now why do we want to use volume? Okay, volume, we can use it for 2 things. The most important one would be for balancing. First, we need to balance the orchestra or the different instruments that we have in in our template. Okay, we will have many instruments and we have to balance them, so when we just come here to the double basses pizzicato, then it sounds balanced, you know, compared to the staccato violins, for example. Okay, so it's got to be balanced, and not all the libraries will sound the same. Some libraries will sound louder, some others will sound softer. So first, most importantly, volume is for balancing the orchestra, the different instruments within our template. Second, we can use volume as well for balancing within contact, within our sampler or play. Sometimes we will have multis, okay? This one right here, for example, is a multi, okay? So when there are several instruments that I load here, so they play together, okay? Now within contact, and those instruments will route back to just one track. So we need to balance that, and within contact we will do that. Finally, volume, we can apply volume for giving dynamics to our instruments. And yes, generally we will hear that we have to use modulation for dynamics. The truth is though, if we help modulation with a bit of expression, which is just like volume basically, will give extra dynamics to our instruments. Okay, so for example, if I'm using just modulation, it's fine. But now if I use expression, first thing, I can start from nothing, from niente. That's one thing, and also I'm enhancing, as we said, dynamics. Okay. So keeping that in mind, we've got to choose one volume that we use for playing dynamics with modulation, and sometimes also with vibrato. Okay. That being said, my recommendation when it comes to which one to use is, I don't use control change, MIDI control change number 7. There's people that do use control change number 7, and generally this one comes here. Okay, those are all MIDI tracks. Okay, the return, the audio tracks with the returns are hidden at the moment, and generally I will not use MIDI control change number 7. In the mixer, I'll use gain and volume. Okay, gain and volume to balance the orchestra. I'll use gain and volume to balance the orchestra, and I'll do a overall balancing, and I won't touch them. Okay, generally, unless I need to do some automation, I won't touch those. Okay, and if I've got to do some automation, usually I'll do automation over the volume fader, and I'll use the gain for balancing. Okay, but I prefer having those steady, so the balancing is right all the time. Okay, for fine tuning, I will use expression. So how does this go? Before I start recording any MIDI information, I will record a little bit of expression. So it'll go like this. I'll choose when I have to record. I'll come here. I'll set the right volume, and then I'll start playing. Okay. So those are for short notes. If it would be long notes, as I described before, I would use modulation, this one down here, and expression for giving dynamics. Okay, but since I've got pre-balanced the orchestra in the mixer before, then I know that if I go from down here to up here with expression and modulation, it'll be within the range of the instrument. It won't sound much louder. Okay, I always have extra headroom in case I needed some instrument to sound a bit louder than usual within the regular balance. Okay, so we said I use 11 for balancing. If it's a short notes type of patch like staccato, I'll record a little bit at the beginning of the recording, like this one here. If it's a long notes, then I'll use it for enhancing the modulation. Okay, I usually record expression and modulation at the same time. Okay, we also said that for the multi-patch type of instruments, where I've got more than one patch loaded for one instrument, sort of thing, that it's different patches that route to one audio track, then within Contact or within Play, I will use the volumes here to balance. Contact has this option where you can click and learn MIDI, and then, for example, this is expression, I could learn MIDI here, but I don't like that because I'm losing all the balancing. Okay, so I don't use that in case I needed to, in case I loaded the patch that I cannot use expression for controlling the volume of that patch, then I would come in here, I would go to amplifier, modulation, and I would create this one here. Basically is you will come here, external sources, MIDI CC, and then you would select 11, -1, and that's it. Okay, make sure that's the exact configuration. I'm gonna get rid of this one, and that will allow you to control, and you have to make sure that in the group editor you selected all groups. Okay, otherwise you will just be affecting to one layer. Okay, now we've also said that I use the fader volume and the gain for balancing the orchestra, and when you are doing so, we have to be careful not to bring it up too much, and so it distorts either the input, the output, or at the summing at the end. Okay, so we've got to be careful with that for them to distort in the input, output, basis, or master. Okay, or even the studio out. So that's how I manage volume and balancing within my sequencer. You didn't have to do it that exact way, but remember that there are many places where you can change the volume. You will be using volume for different purposes like balancing or expression, giving dynamics to your instruments, and you should decide which one to use when, so everything is organized and you keep it efficient. Key switches. Okay, pros and cons. Well, first of all, let's talk, what's that, key switches. Okay, there are some patches when you have got your sample library. You will have some patches that will be like regular patches where you can load legato or long notes or staccatos. Okay, that's a regular patch. Some other patches will come with key switches. What does that mean? Is that, well, in the lower part of the piano, of the keyboard, you will be able to switch between different articulations. Okay, so if you press the C0, then it'll be, I don't know, like staccatos. The D0 will be trills, legatos, long notes. Okay, there are some libraries that will include some articulations. There will be other libraries that will include all the articulations. Usually those patches with lots of articulations, those patches with lots of articulations, they'll be very heavy. They'll use a lot of RAM. When we load those patches, they'll use a lot of RAM. So we've got to be a bit careful with that. Okay, so pros and cons. Okay, so the question is, should I use key switches or not? Do I have to go one way or another? Or we'll see at the end that we can choose to go sort of hybrid and combine both. Okay, so first, if we decide not to go with key switches, in other words, loading separate tracks for different articulations. So we'll have for violins, we'll have the staccatos, the spiccatos, the long notes, the trills, the tremolos, every articulation. Okay, harmonics, etc. And that's without key switches. So pros, more flexibility, right? Because we've got every track, and when it comes to, for example, exporting stems, then we can route different tracks to different buses, and that gives us more routing flexibility. Layering, we can copy and paste the staccatos to the spiccatos. Maybe we want to create sort of a hybrid thing between spiccatos and staccatos, or maybe we've got the sustained notes, or we want to give a little bit more of attack to those sustained notes, and then we will copy and paste that to the staccatos, and we will mix it in a way that the staccato sort of gives that longer note a bit more of a, you know, bite, more a faster attack. Okay, so we've got more flexibility. The inconvenience of not using key switches is that we will end having a massive template. Because think about that. Let's talk flutes, staccatos, long notes, trills, etc. That's for the flute 1. Flute 2, same thing. Oboes 1 and 2, etc. And we are talking just about woods, and we've got to go with brass and then with the strings. That's a lot. Okay, with percussion, it'll be smaller, but then it comes to timpani. Okay, timpani, single hit, rolls, hard mallet, soft mallet. Right, we've got a lot of things, and obviously, that is going to take a lot of space, but we will gain flexibility. Okay, so the other way around, we will use key switches. Okay, so what the pros? Well, we will have a small. What is going with key switches is loading those tracks that already include key switches in there. So we've got one track which is going to be called violins 1, for example, and in that track we will have all the articulations. Okay, so pros, definitely we'll have a smaller template. It can be a more organized template. We will basically have those tracks, those instruments that we've got in an orchestra, and we can have them organized in like score order, right? We'll have piccolo, flute, oboe, etc. And then we'll go with the brass, and then we'll go with the percussion, harp, etc. And then we end with the strings. That could be an idea. So, and that brings us to the next good thing about using key switches, which is when it comes to exporting MIDI for prepping the score, right? When we export the MIDI for creating the score after finishing the mockup, then it's easier because every track is what we will need for the score. The only thing we will have to do some MIDI prep, but we will have to, for sure, we will have to delete all the key switches, which generally will be lower notes, okay, before exporting the MIDI to the score. But it'll make things much easier. Think about not having key switches and having all those tracks, right? Flute, staccato, long notes, trills, etc. We've got to blend them, right? We've got to merge them before exporting. Okay, and the inconvenience of using key switches. Well, we cannot do layering. What we have explained before, we can't go that way, and we will lose flexibility when it comes to exporting stems. Okay, so that's the other thing. We won't have that much of a routing flexibility, and that's something that we will talk about later. When we export stems, why do we export stems, which is for mixing, and which tracks do we need to have, or what stems do we need to have separated so we have flexibility afterwards for mixing. And we will see that we will need to have separated at least the short notes and the long notes, and ideally having also separated the high and the longs, the high and the low instruments. Okay, so we will, for the strings, for every family we will have 4 stems generally, which will be the high, the high shorts, the high longs, the low longs, and the long shorts. Okay, so with key switches that is going to be a problem. Okay, because we want, in one track we will have the violins and we will have the staccatos, but also we will have the legatos, and that is going to give us some headache when it comes to separating and having flexibility for exporting stems. What's the solution then? Well, or what do? I like key switches. It makes our life, for composers, it makes it easier. Okay, having it keeps things organized. Okay, so I do use key switches, but I still keep separated all the long notes and all the short notes. Okay, so if I'm using key switches for violins, I will have And if that patch includes all the key switches, then I'll load that patch twice, and I'll name it differently. The first one will be called violins 1 longs, and the second one will be violin 1 shorts, and all the short articulations like staccatos, spiccatos, maybe marcato. And for the long notes will be sustained, legatos, okay, maybe trills, harmonics, etc. Loading one patch twice does not double the RAM amount, okay? So that doesn't really, it's cool to have it loaded twice. There are some libraries, okay, Spitfire strings, that you will load the patch and it'll include all the key switches depending on the version that you bought, and then you can select which one, which key switches to, which articulation, sorry, you want to be active. Okay, so if you activate all the articulations, it'll load more RAM. If you deselect some of them, it'll load less RAM. Okay, so when it comes to key switches, you can use key switches or not. Not using key switches will have some pros and cons, and using key switches will have pros and cons. And but there is always a third. There is also a third way, which is going hybrid, using key switches, but still separating all the short articulations and all the long articulations for every instrument. As we have discussed in an earlier video, when we are orchestrating, when we are producing a mockup in our sequencer, there will be different rules that will apply as opposed as recording an orchestra in a scoring stage. Having different tracks in our sequencer is a different thing than having all the orchestra playing at the same time in a concert hall, for example. And as we said, we'll have two main problems: frequency stacking and some noise. To prevent those things from happening, we will use EQ. Now, remember that all the concepts that we are explaining here are not about EQ for mixing. We will learn some specific EQ techniques so when we are mixing afterwards, we can apply them. Okay? Now, what we are learning are some concepts we have to apply when we are composing. So I'm gonna load an EQ plugin, and I'll select the Violins 1 track. So this is Violins 1, and as you can see here in the spectrum analyzer, the higher we go, the higher frequencies. Okay, now, when we go up here, you can notice we've got some noise down here. Let's give it a try. Okay, that noise in the low end, 50 to 100, is not the problem when we have one track. As we said, we will have many tracks. And when we've got this noise sound in several tracks, it'll stack, and at some point we may not be still able to hear it, but it won't help for this area to sound clear. So we want to get rid of that sound, so we don't get frequency stacking and low end noise. Okay, so we will load one EQ plugin for every single track, for every single instrument that we've got. As you can see, I use the Cubase stock EQ, but as an alternative to the stock EQ, I like Pro Q from FabFilter. Okay, so we will load one EQ in every channel, and the first thing that we are doing is cutting the low end. Okay, so for every track, I will cut below 20 to 30. I'll apply a low cut filter with 48 dB per octave. This cut will do two things. First, it will prevent for the low frequencies that we can't hear to be in the mix, and will help the plugins work better, and will clean up some of the space. And second, we'll get rid of some of the low-end noise that we just saw. For those instruments that are a bit higher in register, we will cut a little bit more, okay? But we have to be careful. We don't want to affect the sound of the instrument. So the way we are doing this, we've got two approaches. If you are setting up a template, then you will have to do a generic cut, okay? So you'll play the lowest note of that instrument, a G for this violin, for violin section, and then you will cut right at the end of it. You will have to use your ear to see when the sound starts to change. And then we'll give some extra space. Okay, so for the violins, you may want to cut around 100, something like that. Now, if you don't have a template, or you are changing the EQ settings for that specific song, and for example for the violins you aren't using the whole range and you're just using the higher range, you're playing up here, or for example you are having like just higher staccatos, you could cut a little bit more. You could cut like here. But again, if we've got a template, we'll make a generic cut, which in our case was around 100. Now, that will solve loads of problems. But we've got another area that's a bit problematic, and it's the area around 2 to 300, okay? That area we want to cut a little bit. We will do a cut like this. But we have to use our ear to define what exact frequency we want to cut. So we have to know two things here. First, we want to do a cut lower than -2 to -3 dBs. Okay, if we are cutting more than that, it is because something's wrong in the arrangement. And second, in order for us to find the frequency that we want to cut a little bit, we will follow this procedure. First, we will increase the Q. So we reach for a narrower frequency. Second, we will bring up the gain quite a bit. Third, we will hit play in our sequencer and we will move this frequency back and forth from around 200 to around 350, something like that. We will try to spot, we want to hear which instruments are playing here. Maybe at this range we are having the bassoons, maybe some trombones, and we want to see at what point that area gets more muddy. So we want to spot which frequency is bothering the most, is making this area sound muddier. Once we spotted that area, we will bring down the gain at around -2, -3, and we will bring down the Q. That's it. That won't make big of a difference in the first place. But when we put all the tracks together and we've done this procedure in every track, it'll make a big difference and will help this area sound much cleaner. You can try applying the same concept at around 2K, 2 to 3K. We may have some frequency stacking here as well. So if you find this area to sound a bit treble, you can cut in some of the higher instruments as well here. The only difference here is that when you bring down after finding the frequency that's bothering here, once you bring this one down, you want to increase the Q a little bit more, otherwise you are taking too many frequencies, okay? So the Q for the higher frequency will be a bit higher as well. Let's see an example. Let's grab the cellos here. And let's load an EQ plugin. Let's do the cut first. So it'll be something like this. Oops. So the cellos are doing something like this. Okay, I'm soloing this track just for you to spot what the cellos are doing. But when we are EQing, we do not want to solo our track. When we are EQing and finding the frequency that's bothering, we wanna do this in context because we wanna hear where these cellos are making this area muddier within the context with the rest of the instruments. So let's do that. I'll play the track and I'll try to find the frequency where the cellos are making this track in this area sounding muddier, and then I'll bring it down a couple of dBs. I spotted 234 to be an area where it actually makes it sound muddier. Up here, it didn't sound great. Of course, we are increasing 21 dBs here, so it's not going to sound natural at all. But up here, it didn't affect the mix that much. It didn't make this area sound muddier. When I came back here, I was losing the low end of the violas and some of the woods. So the next step would be bringing this down, minus 2 dBs, something like that, something very subtle, and the Q down as well. And that'd be the end of it. This will take some minutes the first time, but very soon you'll become better at it and should be able to do this in every track with no time. So recap, when it comes to syncastration, we've got many tracks and we will have mainly two problems. We will have noise in the low end and we will have frequency stacking. So in every track, we will cut the low end at around 20 Hertz. If we have higher in range instruments, then we may cut a little bit more, but we have to be careful not to affect the sound of that instrument. Once we find the spot, we back up a little bit, okay? That will help first cutting the low end and getting rid of the lower frequencies that we don't need. The second problem that we have is some frequency stacking, especially in the mid-low end at around 200 to 300. So we will find the spot. Remember not to solo the tracks. We want to make this in context. We will increase the Q. We will spot what's the area where this instrument is bothering the most and making this area sound muddy, and we'll bring it down, not much, something around 2 to 3 dBs. Then we will decrease the Q and we are ready to go. We may do a similar procedure in the high range, 2 to 3K, if we find that the instrument is stacking some frequencies in that area. Remember that the Q here will be a bit higher. We will do this in every track, in every instrument that we load, and it will help our mockup to sound much clearer. Okay, last week we saw the basics. This week we are talking about how to put all those concepts that we learned last week and how we put them together in a way that makes sense and allow us to work efficiently. We're talking about templates, and we'll find some challenges when we are setting up our template. We are also talking about not only how to create that template, but also deciding what type of template do we need. Do we need like a big template, or we can go with a smaller template? We'll talk about something in between, which is the modular template, and we'll see with different sequencers how we can go with the modular template. We'll say Cubase, which is like the general what every other sequencer would work like, and then Sonar, which got a cool feature for loading sets of tracks. So we have that modular template. We'll talk about reverbs, because it's a type of plugin that takes a lot of CPU resources, and how do we deal with reverb when we are having a big template. We're talking about groups. It's all templates this week. It's important because with that is like our tool that will allow us to compose afterwards. Yes, our template will change and will evolve with time, but there's a moment where we have to set our sequencer and not always starting from scratch. So very excited about this week, and see you there. Okay, routing, super important concept here. It may seem a bit complex, not complex, it's just long. But then once you get the idea, I assure you, this will sink in. You'll be repeating this over and over again. So to give you an idea, if you've got 300 tracks, you'll be repeating this 300 times. The good news though is sequencers will have a way to automate, sort of automate that. So there are some sequencers that will be better or will make things easier. Let's talk, for example, Sonar has a very effective way to do this, Cubase. And others will be just more like a manual thing that you'll be doing. Okay, so this video will be as 3 parts. First, we will do a quick overview of the routing. Second, we'll explain why this is specific system, and finally we'll go step by step, right? And we will see in depth. Okay, so I'll try to make this as short as possible, but I don't want to miss anything, so it may take some minutes. Okay, real quick overview, how does all the audio routes within our sequencer. So generally we will have what? We will have our keyboard, maybe a MIDI controller, maybe a breath controller. Those devices will send MIDI information that we will get in our DAW. Okay, in our DAW sequencer, we will insert, we will load different synths or samplers, right? Several of them: Contact, Play, Vienna, Ensemble Pro, maybe, Atmosphere, Zebra. Okay, and those we need a system to have control over every output. Okay, because Contact, for example, it can output 16 different stereo tracks, even more, or 5.1 tracks. Okay, and so Atmosphere can output 8. Okay, so we want to have control over every single audio output. Okay, that's super important. Okay, we'll spend most of this video talking about this part here. Okay, so we've got all the MIDI information, we've got all the synths loaded, they convert MIDI into audio, we route the audio outputs into these audio tracks, and then we route the audio out from those tracks back to a set of buses. Super important, so we have control over those. If we've got 300 tracks there, we want to have 20 buses here, so we've got control, and we can just listen the strings, or lower the volume of all the strings, or just listen the orchestra, or just the percussions, or just the synths. Okay, those will make our life much easier. Okay, so that's the process: MIDI into audio through the synths that we got loaded, and all this audio gets routed through different audio tracks. We've got control over every audio track. We can insert EQ, we can automate volume, and then all those audio tracks get here to 20-25 buses that we have control over. Okay, making our life easier. Then it goes to the speakers. Okay, so we've said why. So why we need this system? Well, we need this system because usually a synth, when you load a synth, usually it'll have by default all the audio will be routed through just the first default stereo output. Okay, so output 1 and 2. And if we've got 16 instruments here, let's say violin 1, 2, viola, etc., right? We've got 16, and those, all those 16 instruments, they get routed through one stereo audio output. We don't have control over that. We don't know if we want to insert different EQs, or you want to pan them differently, we want to change volume outside of the sampler, then we don't have control. Okay, that is why we use this system. So we've got control over every audio track outputting from the different synths. Okay, step by step, we get this. We've got our MIDI devices. They are connected usually these days USB cable or MIDI cables. If you're using MIDI cable, usually your audio interface will have an MIDI input and output. If you've got more than 2 MIDI cables, because you've got different different MIDI devices. Then you will have a MIDI interface that will connect through USB to your computer. Okay, you'll install the drivers, you know how this go. Okay, connect to your computer, and that gets into your DAW. Okay, so that's the MIDI in. Okay, now in your DAW, in your arrangement window, you will set up different tracks. Okay, usually those tracks will be set up in a set of 2 tracks. You will always have a MIDI track, audio track, MIDI track, audio track, etc. MIDI audio. Okay, so key concept here: every single track will have always an input and an output. If it's a MIDI track, MIDI out. If it's an audio track, audio in, audio out. Okay, so all the MIDI tracks, for all of them, we will select MIDI in all inputs. So in other words, we want that every MIDI track, we want them to receive the MIDI information coming from any device. So MIDI in all MIDI inputs. Okay, so no matter if you're using a breath controller or a MIDI controller or a keyboard, every track will receive all of them in any channel that you write the information, okay, from. So which MIDI track receives MIDI and when we activate them? Usually, most of the sequencers, when you click that MIDI track, it's ready to receive MIDI. Sometimes you have to click and activate. You click the R button, so it receives. It's like, okay, I'm closed, R, okay, I'm open and I can receive MIDI information, sort of thing. Okay, but usually Sonar you have to click and click record. Okay, Cubase is sort of the same thing, but you can do retrospective recording, which is you'll play, you'll record, you'll hit R or the key command that you assigned, and then you'll record the information that you recorded before. Great tool. Anyway, you will click those tracks, they'll get activated to receive the MIDI information coming from your MIDI devices. Okay, that's done. Okay, now here's where the fun part comes. Okay, so every track has an in and out, MIDI in out, audio in out as well. Okay, so we receive the MIDI information coming from our devices, and now we have to output this MIDI, because every single synth or sampler, basically what a synth or a sampler does is it converts the MIDI information that it receives and it converts into audio that it outputs. Okay, that's how it works. If it's a synth, it'll generate that audio through algorithms, back in the days oscillators. If it's a sampler, it'll trigger the audio samples recorded and stored in your hard drive. Okay, that's why the sample libraries are so big generally, and the synths aren't. Okay, the samplers, they'll store audio information. Okay, so the synth will have a MIDI input and then audio output. Actually, it'll have several MIDI inputs and several audio outputs. Okay, so you will have a set of tracks, always 2 tracks, MIDI and audio, that will interact with the synth or sampler. Okay, so the MIDI will receive the MIDI information in from your devices, and it will output the MIDI out to the synth. The audio will receive the audio out from the synth to the audio in the audio track, and then it'll output the audio to the buses. Okay, but so this is a process: MIDI in, MIDI out. When we've got this MIDI track, we will click in the MIDI out, okay, and we will select, okay, I want you to output this MIDI information to and we will select synth number 1. We'll name that synth, maybe it's a string, synth named strings, channel number 1. Okay, within the synth or sampler, let's say contact, we will load different patches. Okay, every patch, so let's say violins 1, violins 2, etc. Every patch, since those patches are in sampler or a synth, every patch will have MIDI in and an audio out. Okay? Every patch will have MIDI in and audio out. So when we are here, we will select, okay, I want you to output the MIDI information to synth number 1, channel number 1. Okay? And the second one will go to synth number 1, channel number 2, and the third one, synth number 1, channel number 3, number 4, channel number 5, channel number 6, etc., etc. Okay? That's how it goes. And here, when you load the different patches, in every patch you will select, for this patch, MIDI input, MIDI in. I want you to listen channel number 1, and for the second patch, channel number 2, for the channel 3, MIDI channel number 3, etc. Okay? And for every one of those patches, you want to output through the audio same number as the MIDI in. Okay? So the patch number 1 will input MIDI through channel number 1, output audio channel number 1. Okay? For the second patch, MIDI in 1, MIDI in 2, audio out 2. Patch number 3, MIDI in 3, audio out 3, etc. Okay? So that's how you set up your synth or sampler, and we know how to set up the MIDI track. How do we set up the audio track? Same concept. We've got an input and an output. For the input, we want to say, I want to receive from synth number 1, channel number 1, number 2, number 3, etc. Okay, so you've got the different patches within the synth or the sampler. We've got patch number 1, 2, 3, tal, with the outputs 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. For the audio outputs 1, 2, 3, and for the audio tracks in your arrangement window, you want to receive the audio outputs to the audio inputs in those tracks. Okay, same channel, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, etc. Okay, so that's the hard part. Now it's when the easy part comes, right? Once we've got all this set up, MIDI output, synth output, audio input, now it's simple. Okay, every single track, we've got hundreds of tracks, or maybe 80 tracks, but many tracks. We will set those outputs to be routed to these buses here. Okay, so if we've got hundreds of tracks here, we want to have 20 buses here, 25, something like that. Okay, so first step, we will set up the buses. Okay, we may have, high strings, low strings, shorts, longs, all the woodwinds and brass, etc. We may have all the percussion high, percussion mid. We will talk about those and how to set up those. Okay, but then once we've got those buses set up, we will come here, and for those outputs, depending on what instrument and what articulation, we will route that to those buses. So if we've got, for example, violins, we've got the spiccatos, staccatos, trills, longs, shorts, etc. So for these spiccatos and the staccatos, we may want to route those to the high, so strings, high, short. Okay, so all the high strings, we can have control over those in one bus. And most importantly, when we export different stems, since we've got all the buses set up, we can export in one bus, and it's already for mixing with the stems. We'll talk about that. And what are those? Basically, if we've got 20 stems here, we may want to have or if we've got 20 buses, we may want to have a smaller amount of buses. So all those buses, we can reroute them in a smaller group. So for example, we can have orchestra, percussion, synths. Okay, so all the orchestra will go here, all the percussions will go. If you've got like 5 percussion buses, then we'll go to 1. So we can just solo the percussion and hear what's the percussion doing, or solo the orchestra and see if it's well balanced, etc., and get rid of all the percussion so we can hear the orchestra, stuff like that. Okay, and finally those will be routed to the master track, and the routing is always the same: input, output, input, output. Okay, every bus will have an input and an output, and we will say, when we are here, we'll say, okay, I want you to output. Okay, I know the audio in, but for the audio output, I want you to output to bus, and it'll appear the name of the bus in your sequencer. Okay, you will see the bus, for example, strings, high, short, and it'll get here, and then here, and then here to the master track, the stereo master track or 5.1 master track, which will go through your MIDI, through your audio interface, will go to your speakers and headphones. Okay, so that's it. That's the process. It seems a bit long. It's very simple. Once you get it, you'll be real quick at it. You'll be fast. Very important. I hope it sinks in soon. I'll see you in the next video. Okay, so small and big templates. What's better? Do we really need a big template? What's the pros and cons about big, small templates? So templates, setting up your template is a lot of fun. It can be, you can either love it or hate it, actually. I love all the science behind creating a template. It may sound simple at the beginning, but then, well, first, what's a template? A template is a set of tracks that you have preloaded. Okay, so you will load your template and you're ready to go. You've got all your instruments there, so you just put your hands on the keyboard and you're ready to go. Is it good to have a template? Yes, it is cool to have a template. That will generally speed things up, because there will be tasks that you'll be repeating over and over again. Why should you, if you could have them preloaded and ready to go? Okay, so now, how big our template has to be, and then we will talk in another video. We will talk about our minimum setup. Okay, but let's talk about big templates versus no template or small templates. Okay, so a big template is cool because you've got all the tracks ready, loaded there. So that's a good thing. In the other hand, though, there are some, not problems, but some cons there. Well, the more tracks you have, the bigger your template is, right? And the more scrolling you'll be doing. It seems, you know, it's funny, right? Well, you've got to scroll, and so what? Well, it's harder to manage a bigger template. We've got tools. I mean, I have a fairly big template. I use a fairly big template, not a massive template. Back in the days, I preferred having a bigger template. We've got tools for managing big templates. We've got folders. We've got key commands, right? We can hide or show tracks, specific groups of tracks. The sequence will give us tools for managing big templates. Cubase is very good at managing templates. So we can mitigate that problem of having to manage a big thing. Okay. The other thing is, the bigger the template, the more chances for potential problems. Usually, the bigger the template, the more CPU resources that we'll be using, the more libraries that we are using, the more memory, the more RAM that we are using. And when you are pushing, you know, when you are using more and more resources of your computer, the more chances for it to go unstable. Okay, so a big template, it's not just, you know, one sequencer with lots of tracks loaded. A big system could be as big as several computers running Vienna Ensemble Pro, loading lots of RAM in every computer, connecting them through, you know, using Ethernet, using Vienna Ensemble Pro, and sending MIDI and audio over LAN, and having all the audio routed back to your main computer, which also maybe it's running the video using another computer for saving resources. And in the main computer, maybe you've got Ableton Live rewired to your main host, to your main computer, you know, and you're using Live for all the loops. That's a big system, right? It's very common. That's a big system. What are the chances to have something going wrong there? Many chances. When you've got a system that as big as that one, usually you will have an assistant or someone who sets up the system, so when you get there, you have to compose everything's ready. Because again, that's how it is. The more complex, the more chances for something to go wrong, and that doesn't help inspiration, right? If you are inspired and something technical comes up, all the momentum is gone. Okay, so that's something that we have to consider. That's something that can happen with the bigger the template, the bigger the system, the more chances for it to happen. Okay, so now small templates. Well, with the small templates, it's like you will feel that you are loading the things, the same tracks over and over again. You're doing the same things. Yes, there are ways to mitigate that. You could have a small template with the things that you do over and over again, or the tracks that you're using all the time. You could have them preloaded, but you don't have to have all the tracks. Now, the cool thing about small templates is that you usually aren't using that many CPU resources or memory, so you've got a lot of free space. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that no matter how big your template is, you always have to have free space. Okay, if you're using a big template, that big template should not be using more than 40% of your CPU and memory resources. Okay, because you will be loading more tracks, and don't think that if you are using 40% of the resources, then you have a 60% free. That's not how it goes. When you're pushing a computer 75-80%, things start happening. Okay, so we need some free space. Why do we need some free space? Because no matter how big your template is, when you're approaching this new project, you may need a Duduk. You may not have a Duduk loaded. You may not have a small taiko, or you may not have, you know, a very specific tabla rhythm loop that you want. Okay, so we cannot have everything loaded. We will have the basics, we will have the orchestrals, that we will have some epic percussion, we will have pianos and choir, but we cannot have everything. So we will always be loading more stuff. That's part of the creative thing of a composer. We have to keep it fresh. We cannot be using the same instruments over and over again. Another thing about big templates is that we tend to use the same things, the same sounds, and in a way we sound the same if we are using the same template. If we start fresh every time, our sound changes. Okay, our music, I mean, our language, it's sort of the same, and we keep the essence, but it changes, it's fresher every time. Okay, now with all those pros and cons, big templates, small templates, you know, what to choose. You know, it's great having a big template, but we've got all those problems, and it's going the small is like more flexible. It's, you know, you sound fresh all the time, but then I wish I had everything loaded. So what's the approach? Well, there's the modular template approach, where you have the basics. We'll describe that in a second, the minimum setup, and then we can load sets of tracks. Okay, Sonar is very good at that, because Sonar has this. Cubase is very good at handling huge templates. Sonar is very good about modular templates, because Sonar's got this thing is called template track, and then you will load as, you know, contact, for example, with 16 tracks, strings, and you will route those outputs to different returns, and those returns to different buses and with specific effects, and you'll save that. You'll save that as template track. Okay, next day you'll open a blank project, and you will hit, you know, right click and load template track, and you will load that, and it'll load the whole thing with contact, with the patches loaded, with all the tracks, returns, all the routing, all the plugins, all the buses, and the plugins inserted on the buses. And that's really cool, because you can save all the strings, all the brass, all the epic percussion, all the pitched percussion. And depending on what you need, if you need to go with like epic orchestral trailer type of music, you will load specific sets of tracks. If you need to go more like intimate small strings and piano, you will load another set of tracks. It's really cool. Okay, so that's like the hybrid, like the in between big and the small templates, the modular template approach. And Sonar is very good at that. With Cubase it's a bit harder. We will see how to approach that. Generally, we will have to import tracks from other sessions. We will see that in future videos. So routing, we are applying the same concepts that we learned before. We are applying them real life. This is Cubase. As a note, the steps that we are taking here will be slightly different in other sequencers, but the concepts behind it are the same. Okay, so first thing we're loading Contact as a sampler. So with Cubase we are going devices, BST instruments. Okay, we come to Rack Instruments and we'll hit Contact 5. It'll load Contact 5, and it's asking if we want to create a MIDI track. We say create, and so first thing we've got here is Contact. It's got no patches loaded. We've got set up the 16 outputs here, okay, with Contact. Usually the first time you load Contact, it'll load just the first stereo output. We've got to set up the 16 outputs. Contact can go as many outputs as we want. Not as many as we want, but definitely more than 16. And in this case, I've got loaded 16 audio outputs. Okay, so we've got the first return here and the first MIDI track. We will need to create 16 more MIDI tracks, and we have to create 15 more MIDI tracks because we already have one, and we will need to create 15 more returns, 15 more audio tracks for them to receive the audio coming from Contact. Okay, so let's do that. Let's start with the audio tracks first. So the returns, and the way we do it is here is Contact loaded, and we will set up the rest of them. Okay, and the 14, 15, 16. Cool, we've got them here. That's how Cubase handles creating those returns that will listen the audio coming from Contact. Okay, in terms of MIDI, we'll just right click here, we'll add another 15 MIDI tracks. Okay, so we've got them. Now I like to get them organized. So the way we would do this is, first we will make sure that that those MIDI tracks are pointing right to Contact. Let's change this name because it's generic. Let's call them strings. Okay, strings. And now we will make sure that every MIDI track it's receiving all the MIDI info. So it's receiving MIDI information from here, and any MIDI device that you have connected to your computer, and then it's that's the input for that MIDI track, and it's sending the output for that MIDI track goes to this specific Contact, because we could have another Contact, we could have more synths loaded. So we want this one, those 16 tracks to go here. So it's pointing to strings, which is the name of our strings of our Contact loaded here. And it's in channel 1, the first track, and then channel 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Cool. So MIDI is correct, and the returns are correct as well because we configured them from the BST instruments window here. Okay. So the only thing I like doing is having all this organized. So this one will go 1, this one is 2, 3, 4, 5, and I'll skip this in the video. So we've got them here. Let's just make them smaller. Okay, like this, and let's rename them. Okay, so 3, 1. Actually, copy paste. So this will be 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and I'll skip this. Okay, 4. Cool. So we've got this, and now we're opening Contact, and we'll load some strings. Okay, let's go to list scoring, and let's load staccatos. Okay, violins 1, 2, violas, etc. So those will be 5. Now we have to make sure that all the routing in Contact is correct. Okay, so this is a sampler. Every patch within a sampler will have a MIDI in and an audio out. Okay, so we've got all these configured, the MIDI and audio tracks, but now within Contact every patch should be routed correctly. Okay, so the first one should be MIDI in 1, output out 1. Okay, the second one should be MIDI in 2, audio out 2. Okay, so let's fix this. And we should we should have 3, 3, 4, 4, etc. Okay, now that we've got everything set up, it's a matter of trying. So let's go to the MIDI track, violins 1 staccato. Cool. Okay, violins 2, violas, cellos, and double basses. Cool. And now what's important here is that what comes out from contact comes here as a different track, okay? Okay, so violins 1, 2, viola, cellos, okay, so that's it. Now what's interesting here is that we can load different EQs. For example, if we needed to, we can insert different reverbs if we need it. Okay, and we've got control and flexibility over every different track. Okay, we could have different volumes for different tracks. Okay, for example, this way actually. So we've got violins 1, violins 2. They're going through a longer reverb. Okay, finally, we want these tracks here. Well, before we get to the basses, sometimes we may not want to see MIDI audio. Generally, we will want to see just the MIDI, and so what I do is I get rid of the returns track so it looks cleaner. Okay. So now basses. Maybe we don't want these tracks to go right to the stereo master track. So what we would do is come here and add a group channel track. We will add 2, and we will have the, for example, high strings. Okay, strings high, and then strings low. And for the routing, we'll come here, and instead of going to the stereo, we will select for the violins 1 and 2 and violas to go to the highest strings, and for the violins, cellos and double basses to go to the low strings. Okay, let's make it a bit bigger. Let's make this a bit bigger so you can see the basses as well. And actually, let's make this smaller. And here we go. So this is the violin 1. Okay, and it's going to the highest strings, violin 2, through the reverb, right, that we inserted just for, to the highest string as well. And then we've got the viola, high strings, and then as we come to the cello, we are routing that to the lowest strings, and so for double basses. Okay, so that's it. This is routing. I'll see you in the next video. What's the minimum setup? What would be the smallest template that we could have, other than starting with a blank template, with a blank project? The minimum template is a set of tracks, maybe 7, 8 tracks, that allow us to really quick sketch ideas out. Then we can load more tracks and start orchestrating. But the minimum would be a set of several tracks that allow us to sketch ideas. So after those tracks, which we'll describe in a second, then we would have a series of pre-set up instances, samplers, so we can quickly load patches there. So we want to have everything, even though we may just have 8 tracks loaded, we may want to have 80 more tracks pre-loaded without patches, but pre-routed. So we just have to load the patches, because one thing that actually takes time is, loading another contact and setting up the returns and the MIDI tracks, etc. That takes a lot of time. Okay, so having 100 more tracks pre-routed will help a lot. Okay, so which ones are those tracks that will allow us to sketch things out? And you may think a piano, right? A piano. Yes, that's correct. In my opinion, the minimum template should be orchestral short notes and orchestral long notes. Okay, like having a patch with, it's a patch that you'll press the keys and you've got all the orchestra. You get the orchestral sound. And you can, how do we do that? Well, we could use Symphobia, and we could put together all the patches there. We could put like the strings and brass and woodwinds and maybe some percussion and even choir if you want there. So basically in Contact you will build a multi-patch type of instrument, and you will route all those tracks, all those patches to the same output. Okay, so you want to have one that is shorts, orchestral longs. Okay, same concept. Then you want to have a piano, you want to have choirs, and you want to have percussion. And when I say percussion, there are several. I mean a percussion patch that covers all the keyboard, and you've got all the percussion there. You've got some epic percussion, you've got some orchestral percussion. I would recommend Apocalypse from Sound Iron. Okay, and then you want to have also brass long and brass short, woods short and woods long. Generally, I don't have the strings because my template usually is a bit bigger, and I'll have the strings right underneath. But you could also have strings short and the strings long. I personally like also having stingers. It's just a matter of when it comes to hybrid music, sometimes, or even when you are sketching, you want to have some stingers there to create the effect, and then you'll choose the right stinger. But maybe it's to me it makes sense to have it there. And I also have like low brass and percussion hits. I find myself using it a lot. Okay, so that would be those tracks those tracks, and also the 50 to 100 more tracks pre-routed without the patches loaded. Those, that would be the minimum setup that would allow us to work fast and efficiently, would allow us to sketch things out and then load more instruments for orchestrating and working fast. We've talked about the modular template concept. The idea behind it is being able to save groups of tracks with some presets, some routing, and then definitely some instruments loaded there, and then being able to recall them when we need them. Okay, we'll see how to do it with Sonar. We'll do it as well with Cubase. We'll see that with Sonar they've got a nice feature implemented. With Cubase we'll have to take some more steps. Okay, but check this out. With Sonar, Sonar, this is like sort of the arrangement windows, all the mixer here, all the tracks and buses. Okay, so you'll come here. Obviously, I've got many template tracks saved here, so I'll come here, insert from track template. I'll come down here, strings 5, and see what happens. So see, it's loaded all the tracks. It's included 2 buses, and let's not see the MIDIs here, and all the returns here with the, let's see the in and out as well, with the different outs to the different buses here. Okay, and we've got all the tracks here with different plugins loaded as well, and everything routed. Okay, so the way you do this is when you've got a folder or a group of tracks, basically you'll click here and we'll say I'll come here, file, export, track template. Okay, and you'll save it, and then it'll appear in this menu here, and it'll allow you to go insert from template track, and let's, for example, insert the sketching super patches here. Okay, it loads your contact or your play, and we'll see them appearing here as soon as it loads. The tracks here, and two other buses that it inserted. If it needs to create some buses that they are already here, it'll use the pre-loaded buses. Okay, so pretty neat feature, Sonar. Now with Cubase it's going to be a little bit more tricky. We don't have that of an automated system, so we'll have to take some more steps. Okay, let's say we wanna save this instance, it is horns. We've been composing, we've put together some horn sound, we've banded and added some, we've tweaked it, and those are the horns that we are using here. We like them, and we may want to save this set of tracks. Okay, so usually you'll have your buses already set up in your new template, but let's just say that in your new project you're starting from scratch. Okay, so it'd be a good idea to save the buses. So we'll select the buses, the group tracks here, and we'll go here, File, Export, Selected Tracks. Okay, those will be like stem buses. Okay, and we'll save them, and they're saved. Okay, let's just see the stem buses are here, and they come with some plugins. Okay, insert it here. Okay, so that's the first step. Second step, we wanna save our horns contact. Okay, so come here, we'll save preset, and we'll call those horns. Okay, pretty generic. I recommend being as specific as possible, but horns will make it for now. And finally, we'll save the MIDI tracks. Okay, same procedure here. We'll come here, save track preset, and same name, but we will add MIDI. Okay, so horns MIDI. Okay, we are all set. Now we will close this project, and here we've got our new project. And first of all, let's get those buses first set up so we can browse the tracks afterwards. Import, track archive, and stem buses. Those are the buses that we want to import, and they're here imported. Let's see if they came with the inserts. Inserts here with the same tweaking that we gave to every plugin. We've got the buses. All right, let's make this a bit smaller. Cool. Now, first of all, let's load a new contact here. Okay, let's create a MIDI track. Yes, fantastic. Here's our contact, and now we'll right click here and load preset, and we'll write horns here in case we've got lots of them, and we'll click horns and we'll load it. Okay, let's just make sure that that it loaded. Yeah, we've got the horns, our horns here. Cool. So last step, well, next step would be creating all that's something we have to do. So those are the returns, and finally here's our MIDI track. Let's move this down here. Let's create actually, let's not create the MIDI tracks. Let's bring them from our template, and let's say horns, right? Horns MIDI. Okay, add track, and here are horns track. Now what we could do is, I like having MIDI audio, MIDI audio, MIDI audio, okay, instead of having all the returns here and the MIDI down here, but it is up to you, okay. I won't do it in the video for the sake of saving some time. So what we do have to do though is, we can see here the channels are right, but the input, right, the MIDI output to the contact is missing, so we would have to make sure that it's going to contact. Cool, cool, cool. And okay, so this is the solo horn. Just select the rest of the tracks, and then Alt Shift, and we would select the input, in this case contact. Okay, so we've got them all, and they're ready. Okay, and cool. Okay, the final step would be I'll drag this above every MIDI track, sorry, every return. Let's just color those as well. I actually like having the MIDI underneath, but okay, and then it would be a matter of copy, pasting, copy, paste, etc. Okay, and now what we would have to do is routing the output of these tracks. Okay, so we would come up here, and instead of selecting the audio, so this would go to the brass short, and then the next one would go to the brass long, okay, etc. Is a legato, so brass long as well, and that's it. Okay, we will do the whole thing. So when we see, the problem about setting a template from scratch is that you'll be repeating things that you've done before, and we don't like that. So for example, like I don't want to see the MIDI tracks in my mixer, right? Articulations, horns are basically short notes. It's here, and it goes through the brass short, and then for the legatos, okay, so that is it. What we didn't have to do is coming here and loading all these presets that, you know, we've put some thought on which presets, and we did some listening and selected the best presets, and adjusted volumes and panning, etc. So that's done. That's the sound source. What we did have to do though is some routing, which in Sonar was much more automated. Organization. When we are composing, it is crucial that we keep things organized. Okay, so we've got to organize things so visually we can find things quickly. Also, in terms of loading, we can get things loaded fast. And finally, in terms of exporting, our system allows us to export things fast and quick, either if it's for mixing or for final mastering process. Okay, so real quick, we need tips for organizing, for creating organization. Colors, okay, use colors in your template, and use groups or folders. Okay, sometimes we don't need to see everything, and that visually will help us working faster. Okay, so for working faster and finding things quick, folders, groups, and colors. Okay, when it comes to loading, we are loading tracks over and over again. Okay, so I would recommend having contact instances with multi-instruments preloaded, so we can, when we need specific types of instruments, like for example, I wish I had that, you know, group of wooden pitched percussion that I use for that track. Well, you could open the track and then, sort of save the contact instance and then open it. My recommendation is every time that you've had a contact instance that makes sense, okay, like for example, epic percussion, then save that contact instance or play instance. Just save it. Maybe in the future you will need those instruments, maybe not all the instruments, but some of them. And you will remember that in that track you had that and it sounded great. And if you have to load them again and balance them again and pan them again and maybe apply some effect or tweak them a little bit, that will take forever. If you do a great job once, save it. You may use it in the future. Okay? Super important. And you will not have the resources to store every single instrument with that specific cue and having a template that grows and grows and expands infinite. That's not gonna happen, but you can save those and load them later, okay? So if it's contact or play, those instances that you created and balanced and panned and maybe applied or tweaked some effects there, save them so you can use them afterwards, okay? And another trick when it comes to loading, if you are using Sonar, is using the template tracks, okay, which will save a complete setup of a group of tracks with the routing and plugins and buses, everything. Okay. Finally, when it comes to export, we need to have buses. Why do we need to have buses? Because stems buses. Because when we are done composing, if we are doing the 3 steps process where it's composing, mixing, and mastering, we don't really want to deal with, okay, I'm gonna export the stems. Okay, so I'm gonna put this track and that track and that. I'm gonna export those 4 tracks together. Okay, let's export them. And now that track, you can go that way, and sometimes you will have to go that way. But then you will have to make sure that you don't miss any track, and believe me, it'll happen. You'll miss some tracks and you'll have to go back. Oh, I missed the trumpet. I didn't export the trumpet. It's better to have everything pre-routed. Okay, those 100 tracks that you've got, having them pre-routed through 15, 20, 25 stem buses. Okay, so when you hit export, you will export. You can choose to export the whole mix or the buses, and you will select export buses, and it'll print the buses. And then you will go to your mixing template and you're ready to go. It'll be 20 seconds. Okay, export offline buses and you're ready to go mixing. Okay, so for working fast, the visual part of it, groups, folders, and colors. Okay, for the loading part of it, contact instances or play instances, and template tracks in Sonar, and for exporting fast, having all the stem buses set up. So template organization, we've talked about folders, colors, buses, stems, etc. But some of you've asked a little bit more specific about composing for media type of template, which sometimes, well, it's important having markers, video, right, tempo. And some of you have also asked about Cubase. So this video is going to be a little bit more specific about Cubase, but in other sequencers, but most of the sequencing can do the same, almost the same things that you can do with your sequencers, just finding the way. So this is how I've organized this here. Cubase will give you the option of splitting the screen. It's sort of like in Excel freezing the first 2, 3, 4 lines. So basically everything that you drag up here, it'll be freezed. So you'll scroll this one, but you'll see these 2, 3, 4 tracks that you have here. You may want to also have let's, for example, let's move the dialogue and the temp. You may want to have the dialogue and the temp here as well. So everything that you drag up here, it's gonna be there. It's not the case. I don't want to have dialogue and temp up here, so I'm gonna move this down and the temp here. Okay, so so that's one thing, and the other thing, it's with Cubase you can well, you can see
you can see all the tracks, meaning you will see the MIDI track and the audio return for every track. And so you can see the MIDI coming in here and the audio from the contact. And in this track you could insert any plugin or a specific EQ, etc. But most of the times we don't want to see that many tracks. So what we want to do is just see the tracks the MIDI tracks. So how do we do that? Well, the way we could do that is, let's just see all the tracks. And I have a key command. I'm just using my mouse. I've got a key command that will show just specific tracks. So how could we hide those aux returns that we don't really want to see all the time? Well, there are two things. The first, and not that effective one because it's gonna cause some problems, is here we can set configurations. And so a configuration it'll allow us to set a view configuration and then trigger them using a key command. So here we've got all the tracks, and here now BST returns, aux returns, audio returns. So how do we do that? Well, basically, so let's say that this is our basic view, and we want to filter. We want not to see the returns. What we could do is come here and say hide other tracks, and that'll hide the returns. But the problem is it's gonna hide also the video markers, etc. See, that's a problem. So that's not what we want. So what I did for this view, this no BST returns, basically is I came to visibility, and let's say that I would have, for example, this. I would have those are the returns. Basically, I would select the returns, all the returns. You know, it's a little bit of clicking. And once I've got all the returns selected, right now I've got them hidden. But once we've got them all selected, we hit Alt and click, and that would hide all the returns. So that's my new view, and the only thing that I would have to do is come here and say update configuration for this no BST return. So it's a little bit more of a manual type of setting it up. Let me make this. Okay, it's a more of a manual type of setup, but it works. It's just, you know, you'll just show and hide the tracks that you decide here, and then you will save it as a view. And so then you'll assign a key command here in key commands, and that will trigger the different views. So if I want to see all the tracks, I have all the tracks, MIDIs and aux returns, audio returns. And if I just want to see the MIDI, it's gonna make my template be much smaller, and that's it. But I still keep all those tracks here, which it's convenient having those up here. And finally, the thing that I use a lot is you know, switching between this view and the one with all the tracks. That's one thing. But also when I'm here, I use this view where I just see the tracks that have data. That you can do it here. Show tracks with data. And again, I assigned a key command here for this show tracks with data, and that's it. So I can just see all the tracks with data or all the template. But once you've worked with once you've got first couple of sections, sometimes you'll be reusing. So it makes sense, or at least it makes it easier to have the tracks that you're using for that specific cue. Makes things more efficient, maybe.
Reverbs. Why do we need reverbs, and how to use reverbs? With reverbs, we've got this problem, right? They take a lot of CPU processing, so we didn't have that many choices when it comes to using reverbs. Why do we need to use reverbs? Depth. We've talked about using the different sonic spaces that we've got. We've got left to right, panning, right? We've got high and low frequencies, arranging, but then we've got depth, okay? Some instruments will sound closer, some instruments will sound farther away. And that will come with the nature of the sound, but we can control that by using a specific miking technique. When we load the library, we've got close mic, Decca 3, 4 mics, right? That's like the close, mid, far. That will help a lot setting up depth and reverb. The more reverb we add, the farther away it'll sound in the mix. Okay? So that is why we need to use reverbs. Okay, what options do we have when it comes to have a reverb? Well, we've got 3 options. We can insert the reverb in, we've got that track, and we'll insert that reverb as a plugin. That's option number 1. 2, we can create buses. Like we've got all this template with all these tracks, and we will create 3 buses. We will have one bus with a short reverb, another bus with mid reverb, and another bus with long reverb. Okay. And then when we have all those tracks, we will send a different amount of that track to those buses. So for example, if I've got high strings, I'll create a send in that, high staccato strings, I'll create a send in that track, and I'll send like 20% to the short reverb. And then if I've got like harmonics, I will create a send in that track, and I will send it to the to the long reverb. Okay, that would be option number 2. Option number 3 is inserting the reverb in the stem buses. That would be the one that we'll be using. Okay, we'll explain why. Well, you can use the one that fits your workflow the best, but generally the best option is inserting. If we use reverbs, because we will see that we can use reverbs when we are composing, or we can use reverbs when we are mixing, okay, which will give us more options. Okay, but if we are doing everything in one project, if we are composing and that is our final sound, and we don't go through a mixing process, inserting the reverbs in the stems buses will be the way to go. Okay, generally we will have lots of tracks, like 100 to 200 tracks, and those tracks will be routed through 20-25 stem buses, high shorter strings, high longer strings, etc. Okay, inserting the reverb in those buses will be the way to go. Okay. Okay, what would be the other option? The other option, if we are not inserting, if we are not dealing with reverbs while we are composing, we could deal with reverbs while we are mixing. Okay, generally, the way I approach a track is a 3 steps process: composing, and I'm focusing about music notes; mixing, I'm focusing about sound; and mastering. So I make the track sound loud enough and it sounds the same in no matter what system are you playing the track: speakers, headphones, car, whatever. Okay, so I deal with reverbs here in the mixing process. Okay, why? We've said that reverbs, they take a lot of CPU processing. When I'm composing, I've got loads of tracks, there's a lot of going on there, the computer's really busy. Here, when I'm mixing, I may have 30 tracks, everything's cleaner, I've got more space for inserting reverbs. Okay, what's the goal? And you'll think, what's the big deal with reverbs? Well, when we are creating, when we are composing, we are basically setting different sounds in a space. The more sounds we've got, the more crowded the space is, the more problems we will have creating separation. And when it comes to orchestral music, there's a lot going on, really. If it's like a rock band, like keeping it simple, we would have, guitar, bass, drums, voice. That's it. right? But when it comes to an orchestra, it's a lot of people playing, there's a lot of ideas. How do we deal with that? Well, we have to create separation, and sometimes we will have problems, and on top of that we will have what we discussed before. Samples are different than the real orchestra. We've got problems with frequency stacking. Okay, so using different reverbs with different settings and different character sound will help our music, will help creating separation in our music. You should listen the Dangerous album, Michael Jackson. Separation there is awesome. It's outstanding. Hey, they recorded every instrument in a different room. Why? So the character, so the room sound, so the reverb would be different. And that creates separation. Okay? So we are trying to do the same thing here. Okay? We will use different reverbs. That is why the option number 2, inserting 3 different reverbs, short, mid, long, it's not that cool. It's because we are using the same reverb to different instruments or groups of instruments, and that's not helping creating separation. And on top of that, that doesn't give us that much flexibility when it comes to exporting stems. Okay? So my recommendation is, don't use reverbs when you are composing. Why would actually we need reverbs? If you're using Vienna, then you will need a reverb. You can use Mirror for recreating that space. Vienna Ensemble Library. If you're using Vienna, the way they recorded those instruments is really dry, close mic techniques. Okay, so you will need a reverb for creating that room sound, and they are using convolution reverbs. Okay, but if you're using libraries like East West, Spitfire, Cinesamples, those libraries got recorded in a big Spitfire Air Studios, London, Cinesamples, Sony Scoring Stage. They already got that big room sound with the room reverb. Why do we need to add reverb while we are composing? Definitely adding reverb could help us adding more depth or making things sound better. But we can do that during a mixing, and we will have more choices because we will be able to load better reverbs that take more processing, because while we are mixing, we've got everything's clearer and our computer is not that busy. Okay, so that's it. We've got 3 options: inserts, basses, stems. I would recommend the stems, but then we have to decide when do we use reverbs. If we are using reverbs when composing, then I would insert those to the stems, basses. But we've got the option of using reverbs while we are mixing. That would be the way to go, in my opinion. Okay, remember, the goal with reverbs is creating separation, and the more reverbs that we can use, the better. We'll see which reverbs to use, what type of reverbs will work with what instrument in future videos. But those would be the main concepts about reverbs. What are the computer specs that we need for composing? Okay, very simple. There are 3 concepts here. Okay, we need memory, RAM, we need CPU, processing power, and then we need space for storing our samples. Okay, for that space, we will need hard drives, and those hard drives, the faster, the better. Okay, we will need quite a lot of space, but the critical thing here is the speed of those drives. When it comes to CPU, we've got 2 choices. We can go with a i7 processor, like a regular desktop processor, or we can go with a server CPU. Okay, server CPUs are usually more expensive, but it will allow us to connect several CPUs in one machine, which means more processing power. I personally don't think that's necessary. I would say i7 is more than enough. Actually, there are different ranges of i7. We won't get into that, but the extreme version, yes, it is expensive, but it's super powerful. Okay, So i7 and generally i7s are better for virtualization, and we do a lot when we load a host outside of our sequencer like VE Pro. There are several things why an i7 it would be. It's not better. It's definitely not better. But for our purpose, it serves purpose really well. Okay, and it's less expensive and it can get really powerful. Okay, if you need more, then you could have several computers and use VE Pro, VN Ensemble Pro, for connecting them. Okay, so I would stick with an i7. You can go with Xeons, you can go with server CPUs. They are more expensive. It's your decision. RAM, I would say 16 would be the minimum. RAM, why do we need RAM? Because when we load a patch, it will store some of the information of that patch. It's like the beginning of every node. It's technical. We don't have to really know about that. But when we load a patch, it'll load RAM. And the more patches, the more instruments, the more tracks that we load, the more RAM we will be using. The more contacts with more patches in there, the more RAM we will be using. And there's a moment where we used all the RAM. Then we cannot. We can load more instruments, but then efficiency goes down. The computer starts slowing down because it loads some of the information that had to be loaded in RAM. It loads it in your drives, and the drives are much lower than RAM. Okay, so the more RAM, the better. 16 would be the least, at least 16 gigs of RAM. And these days you can go with an i7, you can go up to 128. Okay, so that's for RAM. And drives, when it comes to drives, there are two types of drives, hard drives. We've got the regular hard drives and the solid state drives. Okay, so we've got two options. We can either go with solid state drives, or we can go with regular hard drives, but then we will need several hard drives, and we will need to load different libraries in different drives. And we've got to think that in a clever way. We've got to design it so we are using all the drives at the same time, so we are summing the speed, right? So if we've got orchestral samples, we may want to load the brass samples in one drive and the strings in another and the woods in another. So when we are using all the orchestra, we are using 3 drives. These days, back in 2009, 2010, solid state drives were really expensive. These days they're expensive, but I would say make an investment on solid state drives. It'll make your life so much easier. They like 10 to 20% faster than the regular hard drives. And if it's big enough, if you've got a 2 terabyte solid state drive or 1 terabyte solid state drive, you just can drag all your samples in there. You don't have to really care about which libraries are where. Okay, so as much RAM as possible, a powerful CPU, i7, and hard drives. Drives, if possible, solid state drives. So now, PC or Mac? So here's the answer. If you're using Logic, you can go with Mac. If you really like Mac, then use Mac. Generally, we will, as we've described, we will need a powerful computer. You can go with an iMac, but that doesn't really have many expansion options. If you are really into mock-up production, you will need the Mac Pro. It's a very expensive computer. For the same price, you can build a really powerful PC. I personally prefer PC. It's much cheaper. You can configure it your way. You can expand it, and most of the sequencers will work with PC. Okay, especially these days. Last year, this year, Sonar went Mac as well, Mac and PC, Cubase Mac and PC, Digital Performer Mac and PC. So it's up to you. If you like Mac, totally go for it. Generally with PC, you've got more flexibility. And that thing about, Mac's more stable. Yeah, Mac used to be more stable. These days, sort of the same thing. Mac didn't have viruses. Yeah, that's, Windows 97, you had viruses. These days, Windows 10, the antivirus sort of thing is built in the OS, same as Mac. All right, so one quick thing, when you're optimizing the audio, and you're trying to keep the latency down while, optimizing your CPU performance and all that, and you'll try to bring down your audio driver or your audio interface latency to, to 256 or 128, or, to trying to bring it down as much as possible, so you're bringing down the milliseconds of latency. Just remember that if you're applying plugins, those are adding latency, all right? So in Cubase, if in your mixer, if you come here and you activate channel latency, it'll tell you how much latency those plugins are adding. So that's one thing. The second thing is, if you're using, so I use UAD plugins because that offloads my CPU. Some UAD plugins add a little bit of latency. Then there are plugins like the BST plugins. Some sequencers, you'll be able to suspend BST3 plugins processing when audio signals, so when there's silence, so the CPU is not processing as much. So that's one thing. But be aware that the plugins add some latency, and also there are some plugins where you can actually get rid of that latency. It won't process the signal the same way. But for example, so this is the Fab Filter, super efficient plugin, but it's got this option that in each band, in each band you can activate the look ahead for 1 millisecond, 2 milliseconds, and usually it's at 1 millisecond, but that generally adds like 20 milliseconds total. And so if you come here and you turn this off, I have to do this in the second monitor because of Pro, so I just turned it off. So if you turn it off, you see it went away. So in this channel, at this point, we didn't have any latency. So that's something that you have to know. So again, when you are trying to optimize and trying to see exactly how much latency you're going and feel and see if you're feeling comfortable here, and you are with Vienna and deciding if you're going to have one buffer or two buffers, and then going to the audio settings and optimizing audio guard and all those things that you can do in Cubase and Digital Performer in Logic, and then trying to bring down your the input latency. So here's when you're trying to bring this down as low as possible and you're testing this. Remember that the plugins are the ones that actually add more latency. All right, so that's something so you know. All right, so that's that. So in the last chat, they asked me about this multi-patch instrument here and how it's built. So basically, the way this is built is, well, first the patches. This basically is Albion. Albion and Symphobia has a little bit of choir that I can activate or deactivate, and then just a little bit of reinforcement with double basses, and just for a little bit more of definition, there's this cello spiccato patch here. So that's that. The only thing to mention here is that I can control the choir. Well, the first thing to mention is that I can control the volume of the entire thing. Right, with expression. So I prefer doing expression and not coming here and doing learn MIDI and then learn the expression here, because everything here is balanced. So the volume is set so everything here is balanced. That's one thing, as well as the panning, it's set the right way. So this is pre-orchestrated. This is done so it sounds balanced and everything sounds where it should sound. Those patches are ensemble type of patches, so every section sounds where it should sound. Moving it a little bit more to the left and to the right just enhances and opens the sound a little bit. All right, so that's one thing. The second thing is Sometimes you won't be able to control volume with expression just because the patch hasn't been built that way. And the way that you will solve this is you will come in here and you'll edit all groups, and then you will come to amplifier and you will add a MIDI CC. So you will come here, external sources, MIDI CC, and then you'll add it and you'll add 11 and -1. That's the way that you're gonna set the instrument. And now you've got control with expression. So that's one thing. The second thing is I've got control over choir with this. And this is the only one actually that I did MIDI learn, and I learned the CC number 2, which is this one here. That in most libraries, this guy here controls a vibrato, but in this case, it controls the volume of the choir, so I can have the choir yes or not. Sort of thing. All right, so that's the first one that they wanted me to talk about, and this is the second one. All right, so the second one is a long note. It's very similar. The only thing to notice here is that I've got control over the same things. So I've got the orchestra, and then I've got the choir. So that's one thing. I obviously can control volume as well, and dynamics. All right, cool. So that's one thing. The second thing to notice here is that in this case here, I can control as well how much brass I want. So if low velocity is gonna bring less brass, I'm gonna get rid of the choir just for. So we've got the strings and woods like bassoons here and the contrabassoons. Lower, so higher velocity is gonna bring the timpani, the gran casa, and more brass. I still have dynamic control, but it's just less brass, more brass. Okay, so just with, to me, there's a lot going on here, there's a lot of configuration, but at the end, what I see is just this. But with that, I still have so much control. I've got, and here I've got, the or. So again, I use these most of the times just for sketching. Sometimes I leave them. This is like the final sound. Most of the times are reorchestrated to gain some width and definition, but I just wanted to share this because I couldn't in the last